So, hello, Bob.
Hello.
Thank you for accepting having this interview.
You're very welcome.
This
Thank you for
dialogue
inviting me.
between the two of us
Yeah.
for the journal, the Italian journal, Quaderni di Gestalt, and also for our site. I'm very curious about what you think on certain aspects of Gestalt therapy. So, as you know, I would like to dialogue with you about a few points, and we already had a conversation in Taormina, but unfortunately we didn't tape it.
That's right.
So now it's important for me to tape it because it's always better to let the others listen at what we will say.
Yeah.
I'd like to start from what we already started about the idea that Isidore Fromm had on the considering the psychotherapist like the object of the interest of the client in his interacting, in the client interacting with the therapist. So Isidore used to say that instead of using the empty chair, put your mother on the chair, tell me what you'd like to say to your mother. And Isidore meant with this what we today we might call a field approach. That is, when the client says something to the therapist, this is much more effective because the therapist is a live person, a live person. And if the client says something to an empty chair, like pretending to say to the mother, this is detaching. This implies detaching from the therapist, from the interaction with the therapist. Implies that the client is detaching from the interaction with the therapist.
Detaching.
Yes.
Okay. Separating. Yeah.
Detaching or
Detaching or
deflecting
detaching?
or
Okay.
distracting.
Yeah.
Maybe distracting from the interaction with the therapist.
Okay.
And since you said that what Isidore said means that the therapist much centralized, make central, like.
Yes.
So just open the discussion. I open the discussion.
I want to respond at several levels. First level is that the value of a theory is in its usefulness. You never prove a theory right or wrong. You can indicate whether it's useful or not. You can prove hypotheses generated by the theory as right or wrong. But a theory is never, in the final analysis, right or wrong. But it is useful or not useful. So I appreciate different theoretical points of view because they may be useful. But some of them, in my view, violate some of the basic tenets of a Gestalt view in the first place. For example, Isidore, he professed, he made up, he decided that he thought that this relationship was always what was going on. And when it is actually going on, that's what I call the fresh fish. That's where we have a wonderful opportunity because we have both of us are involved in the interaction. If you're just telling me stories about your life out there, you can only bring your narrative. You don't have anything else. The other is not there. If something emerges between us, now the other is here and you're here, and the learning happens at the point of difference. At the point of difference where my phenomenological organization meets yours at the contact boundary, and we create something different than either of ours individually. So when that happens, I think that's wonderful. I see no reason to assume that that's what's always going on. To make the therapist central in that way is to assume that you know something that is an interesting hypothesis, but there's very little evidence for it. There's very little evidence empirically for that, and it tends to skew where you go. It will direct where you go. As I said to you in Taormino, if I came in and I'm all upset, I had a fight with my wife this morning, I wanted to kill her, she wouldn't understand, blah, 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 and you ask me, how is it to tell me this? Or what did I do to involve that anger? I look at you like you're from another planet. Who's talking about you? I think it's presumptuous to insert yourself into this unless this is what's happening. If I'm annoyed, you were 2 minutes late or 5 minutes late, and I come in and I may have some irritation about that. You know, I rushed to get here and she wasn't here on time, and or etc. Then sure, it's beautiful. But to make the assumption is a questionable thing to me. I wouldn't make that assumption. I'd be open to it, but not assume that it's ubiquitous in the relationship, always there.
Yeah, I think we disagree.
Yeah.
If I were,
which is great, because that's where we can have the difference and the fun and the learning.
If I were a client, and I come to you as a therapist because I have something with, you know, my partner, it would be important that I say that to you, my therapist. Not that I use you because I'm not okay with my partner. You know, if I imagine a client that comes to me because he has something with the wife, as you said, and he wants to say something to me using me as a therapist, I don't agree with that, because I think that the therapy happens at the contact boundary with the therapist, and for me it's important to know how that client tells me how he is angry to his wife, how he tells me, so how he moves to me, how he uses his anger with telling me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Gestalt therapy is working at the contact boundary, and that's why I think that Isidore used that kind of approach,
Mm-hmm.
because we work at the contact boundary. And so anything happens in the here and now, not because you wanted to make the therapist central, or, you know, but because the therapy happens there at the contact boundary. So I would like to see how you're talking to me about your mother, how you're talking to me about your partner.
And for me, at times, I would welcome that as a client. At other times, I would see it as an interruption, that I'm telling you about something, but I'm with what I'm with. I'm really not with, at the moment, the contact between us. Switching from clinical to theoretical, it also is contradictory to the phenomenological method. The phenomenological method is to, as much as possible, to bracket, to put aside your beliefs, your theories, your interpretations, etc., and allow yourself to be affected by the freshness of the person expressing whatever they're expressing. If you have a preset belief that whatever that person is talking about has something to do with you, then I question it, and I think it's in violation of the bracketing of the phenomenological method. Which, when it's useful, that's fine. Otherwise, you get stuck in being an ideologue and following ideology rather than reality.
I think we might switch a little bit the terminology, you know, because it's not anything you say has to do with me, but anything you say is said to me.
Yeah.
So I would switch. I think we agree on this.
Yes.
No? So when the client comes because he's angry to his wife, and he tells that to you, it's important that you notice how he's telling that to you.
If you don't assume, which I would not, it sounds like you would, that when you're telling me this, how you're telling me this has something to do with me. He or she might be telling that story or that emotional outburst exactly the same way to any therapist. It may not have to do with our relationship.
I don't think the person would say the same content in the same way to a different therapist. I don't think so. I think that the freshness of our encounter means that I am different. As a client, I'm different with different therapists.
I'm thinking of Herb Polster and the population of selves.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we set self as a verb now in different situations with different people differently.
Sure.
But I'm sure you've had the same experience that every therapist has had, where one day you open the door and the client starts. I mean, they started in the waiting room, and they just start and they start.
Okay, but this can be a desensitization in the beginning. Then they have to look at you because you are the therapist, the person who is telling him or her.
But they don't have to. They're not. Obviously, they don't have to. They're not. They're just coming. You can't believe what happened today. That, I think, would be the same with almost any therapist they were with.
Yeah, but then when you go on, you have to build a contact boundary with them. And that's made of you and of the client.
When you say that, I think of Isidore saying, a Gestalt therapist is a well-paid electrician or plumber. I think he said plumber sometimes and electrician sometimes, which is antithetical to a real dialogic relationship. That you have to build the contact boundary. The contact boundary is there, and you do your part. You don't do the client's part. You meet the client with who you are at the place of where they are.
They whom?
They, the client.
But you're a person, you contribute with your own personality.
Of course.
Yeah, I think that when Isidore said, for instance, I made a little dream, and Isidore answered, yes, little like I am. I think that he was referring to a field approach, because if I tell you I made a little dream,
yeah.
Where do I take the concept of little?
And I'm not little, as you can see.
Yes,
and I'm tall. So if somebody said that to me, and again, if they had me as a therapist instead of Isidore, who was pretty little, if they said to me, I had a little dream last night,
you what would you do?
I would listen to them and wait for more. I wouldn't assume or start interpreting that, oh, it was a little dream, therefore they're calling me fat, or therefore, if I'm Isidore, that it has to do with me because I'm little.
It's part of the listening when the client tells you, I did a little dream, I had a little dream, and you wonder, as a therapist, you wonder, where does it taken the concept of little from?
Maybe the dream may be little. Some people may mean it was a short dream.
The dream is not an experience in itself. The dream is told to the therapist.
Sure.
So we are interested in
All
not in the dream
experiences
itself, but the dream, the way it is told to the therapist. So when the client says, I had a little dream, the way he says is important for us. And the way he says is this little. Why does he say little?
Again, I have no difficulty that sometimes that would be true. I have great difficulty with assuming it's always true. There's a story. It may be true or it may be apocryphal. I'm not sure. is a story that Isidore started a workshop. You probably have heard this story. On a Friday night, and he told people about his approach to dreams, and 3 days before the therapy session and 3 days after this and that. And so if any of you have a dream, we'll work on it tomorrow. And somebody came in the next morning, had a dream, and he said that there was a house, a big house with a door. So he said to tell it in the present tense. And the guy supposedly said, I am a house and there is a door. I don't know if it's true or if somebody made it up, but that was a story, and that Isidore laughed.
It's a bit Lacanian, huh?
Like what?
It's a bit Lacanian.
Yes.
Lacan used
Yes,
to
I know.
play with words.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the idea to me, which is important to me, is that the person chooses words and movements, and the person chooses, the client chooses how to tell the dream to that
And to
therapist.
me, sometimes the dreamer is more important than the dream.
I don't
How
think
the
there is a
dream
difference.
presents.
What I'm saying, Bob, is that I don't think there's a difference. When I tell you something, I'm telling you from the wholeness of my person. And the wholeness of my person implies you in this moment. If I'm telling something to you, there is not a separation between me and you.
I think we keep coming back to the same point of similarity and difference. Similarity, that what you say is certainly true some of the time, a lot of the time, small, but you believe it's true all the time, and I don't see it that way. I think that's an unsupported assumption that it's true all the time.
But I don't agree with this way of defining the thing.
Okay.
I don't think it's true all the time. I think that when the person speaks to the therapist, his experience is the wholeness of the field.
Sure, it's
So,
affected, but
what he
also the
says-
cabinet, and
What-
also the camera, and also the bag. I mean,
Sure,
to
it's
make
part
it,
of your experience.
but you don't talk about those. You only talk about the therapist as if that's the only thing in the person's field.
Mhm.
And it's there, the therapist is there, the therapist is important, but the exclusivity is what I differ with.
So you are more, or you agree with the idea that what the person says belongs to the field, and so the experience of the client, as it is told to the therapist, can include
Can.
parts, but includes actually not specifically the therapist, you say, but it can include other things.
It can include anything in the field. It could
Anything in the
include
field,
low
sure.
sugar because I didn't have any breakfast. It could include somebody said something to me in the taxi. I mean, it can.
Well, that's not part of the actual field.
But it's of the client's field. It's not the shared field at the moment, but it's part of the ground of the
I
client's.
think we are speaking of the shared field here now.
Yeah, but well,
Not of what
I would
happened
disagree
with the
with that
taxi.
as well. Pearls was very clear that here and now was not something that he was interested in, that hyphenated here and now. He was interested in now. And now is wherever the person's primary awareness is. It could be remembering, it could be fantasizing, it could be any now. When that now is expressed here, then it's here and now.
Mhm.
And the here and now, he was concerned about that because in the early days, encounter groups got confused with Gestalt therapy at Esalen. They got confabulated in some way, conflated, I should say. And an encounter group leader would say, "Where are you now?" And the person would say, "I'm worrying about a job interview tomorrow." And the leader would say, "No, but where are you now?" His now is worrying about a job interview. He's not here. So when he can say, "I'm worrying about a job interview tomorrow," he now is bringing his now here.
Sure, I agree
Now
with
we
that.
have the here and
I
now.
mean, I agree with that.
Okay, good.
I think, yeah, sure. I mean, we are going. Let's go back. Let's see
Okay.
here.
Reverse.
Let's try to make some clear points. We agree on the fact that what the person says to the therapist is the now, and it's here because it's telling now to the therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse my language, I'm not English native speaker.
Oh. It's bringing the clients or the person's now to the present.
To the present, to the therapist.
Yes.
And so we deal with this. We deal with the telling, with the how the client is expressing himself to the therapist, right? We agree on that.
What do we agree about that?
That the here now is the here is the way the client is expressing himself to the therapist.
Perhaps. It certainly is the way the client is expressing himself. It may or may not have anything to do with the therapist.
Well, this is another point. We are switching to the other point. Let's stay with what we agree.
Okay.
Okay. We agree that we are interested in the here and now, which means how a client expresses himself about any content, present, past, any content, to the therapist.
Okay.
And we focus on this experience, which is an actual experience. It's in the present. Then, whatever the person says to the therapist has to do with, to me, has to do with the intentionality of the intentionality of the client to the therapist. So, if I am the client and you are the therapist, I tell you something that is important to me, but you are important to me because I'm telling you, the therapist, something that I want to solve with you, even if it's my partner and I'm angry to my partner, but I don't want to use you, try to get me better about this. I want you to be my therapist, which is not using you. So my telling you implies that you are important to me.
We don't agree.
Hmm?
We're back to the same thing as far as I'm concerned, and I know you see it differently. That I think sometimes it has to do with telling you, and sometimes it does not have to do with the you of it. It has to do with telling who's in front of me at the moment.
This is at one point we disagree.
Yes.
We disagree clearly.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm a firm supporter, as I imagine you are too, of Occam's razor, the law of parsimony.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that English is not your first language, so I want to be clear. What I mean by that is that the simplest explanation with the least amount of assumptions is usually more accurate than a more complex of unnecessary, meaning more than the simplest explanation.
Well, but to me it's very simple. I think we are just different in the, I don't know what we are different in.
Well,
maybe
I think we're quite different. If I'm sitting with somebody, I don't assume that what they say necessarily has anything to do with me. When it does, I'm very glad it's an opportunity because, as I said, we both have access to that interaction.
yes.
But I don't assume that anything you say has something to do with me.
Okay. And
That's what I see as presumptuous.
well, what I think is that if we are sitting together and I'm telling something to you, I'm telling to you. So you are part of my field, of my intentionality, and what we focus on is how I'm telling this thing to you. But you are part of my intentionality when I say that. In this we are different.
Yeah.
I don't think there is something more simple than something else. We are different.
Okay.
Because you think that it's possible that a person says something just, I don't know to whom, says something.
Saying something to me that has nothing to do with me. That happens.
How can I say something to you except regarding the content? The content can be different from you, but if I say something to you, how can you not be involved in this?
If you say to me, I want to go check my phone, or if you said to this person, I want to go check my phone, it could be that you want to get the hell away from me, or you want to get the hell away from that person, but it might be you just want to check your phone and you're telling whoever you're with that's
But
what you want to do.
I'm telling you I want to check my phone, so I'm asking you.
Yeah.
So you're
Well,
part of
if I'm the only one here, of course you're asking me. But I'm a generic person at that moment, unless there's something about checking your phone that does have to me. So I'm certainly open to and acknowledge that your point of view happens. I just would not assume that it's always there.
I think that.
And I think I told you, this is the same argument I had with Isidore 40 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know how much you could agree if you, because I think you just don't like what Isidore said about being always involved in the.
I don't
in
agree
the
with
content, In the content of the person. So we're not talking about the content.
No, I understand. You're talking about the how the person is expressing what they're expressing. But you're also implying that how they are expressing it is somehow influenced by who you are.
Because there is a contact boundary that we are creating.
Whatever your reason, you're assuming it has to do with something you are. I don't make that assumption.
Because I'm telling something to you. We are creating the contact boundary together. That's why I'm saying.
At that moment, I may not be creating the contact boundary. I may not give a damn about the contact boundary. I may be oblivious to you. I am with whatever the content that I'm talking and the emotions that I'm feeling at that moment. So I just wouldn't assume that. And I think the difference is that you do assume that the how you're telling has something to do with our relationship. Most of the time, if not always. And I would say it has something to do with our relationship sometimes.
So, if we take the example of what we are doing now.
Okay.
To me, we are creating a contact boundary.
Repetitively.
The contact boundary is created anytime we interact, and so we show our differences, we can be present with our differences, and we create a field also, which is sometimes irritated or but in goodwill. And so, since we are creating the contact boundary, this means to me that when I say something, I say it to you, and you say it to me. I'm part of your field. So it's impossible to think that you are saying something without considering who I am.
I'm split right now. Because on the one hand, I'm sure the things you've said about this content that we're talking about, you've said before to other people, and probably in some very similar ways. I know that's true for me, that I've said some of the things I've said to you, I've said before. Some of them I've even said to you before, and I've also said to other people. I think it's just clear that we disagree, and I go back to what I started with. There's no right or wrong here. There's useful or not useful. They're both reasonable points of view, and which assumptions, which set of theoretical assumptions to use at which time would determine when they're useful or not.
Yes, I think it's useful if we perceive each other human and reachable.
Mhm.
So that's for me what is useful. Useful means that a client can find in us a human being, and he is able to rely on us and trust us. I think we agree on this.
Almost. Uh, if we're talking about useful,
You say it about you.
yeah, I was talking about useful in terms of, is it therapeutic? Does it nourish and benefit the client? Then it would be useful. If we just have a nice thing, that's nice, that's lovely, but can the client take it and use it in the world? Is it useful to them therapeutically? Because if it's only here in the consulting room, I don't call it therapy. I call it lovely, but not therapy. Therapy, you have to be able to take it out into the real world and use it.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not following you, because you said you used the word useful.
Yeah.
I tried to understand what you
Okay.
were saying.
I
and
meant
then-
therapeutic, not useful, did we see each other? Because seeing each other is frequently connected to being therapeutic, but it's not the value unto itself. It's a means whereby
Okay, like evidence-based. Useful is
no,
evidence-based.
I don't, not reductionistic like that. But is a dialogic relationship useful in therapy? I'm convinced it is. Without any quote evidence-based studies, with or without them, I'm convinced it is. But someone else might think, no, that's not what's useful to be therapeutic. What's useful for therapeutic is in understanding. I was once on a panel with a psychoanalyst who said, the analysis is over when the analyst fully understands the patient. And I said to him, they didn't come to you for you to understand
Sure,
them. They need to understand.
yeah.
And more than understand, of course.
Okay, so, of course, it's what we believe into. We believe it's useful.
Yeah.
So how do you feel now?
I want something more, I'm not sure what. Because I feel very simpatico with you. I like you. I disagree with you, but I disagree with you on the dimensions, not on the concepts. On the concept that the therapist is important and related and involved, I agree. On the dimensions that that's always the case, I disagree.
Well, I don't identify with it's always the case.
Okay, I'm interested.
Yeah. Because
How would you describe?
I think, as I said, that what the client says to the therapist belongs to a field where the therapist is included. So if I say I had a little dream, I understand what Isidore was explaining, but I don't think that Isidore said it's always the case.
Well,
I
but
think
it
he
sure
wanted-
sounds like mostly the case, most of
I
the
think
time.
he wanted to say, to demonstrate something. I wanted to teach something. Like, if the client says something, then the words that he uses belong to the field. So it might be that the little dream refers to the being little of Isidore. And if this is the case, then it might imply that that client was always denied to say spontaneous things, like he was short. Oh, you're so short. No, but I can say I had a little dream. So he was revitalizing this spontaneity in the client that could not say, oh, you're so short.
You're building, or Isidore is building there, a whole tower based on it might be about me.
It might be, sure.
Of course it might be.
Yeah, but we agree on this.
Yes, that it might be, but it might be about 15 other things. It might have nothing to do with me. But so to take it as a might and then start building on it as if that's already an established reality.
Yeah, so I think, well, that you don't like, or you didn't like Isidore's rigidity, maybe. I don't know how much you really don't agree with this, because I think that he said it doesn't have to be that, it doesn't have to be always like that.
No,
I
but
didn't get that.
I didn't get, but if somebody said, wow, I had a big dream last night, or I wouldn't assume that was about me being big.
I don't think that he said always.
Well, but that's why I was asking you if you could calibrate how much of the time do you think what the client says, of course you share the field of the moment, but how much of it is related to because of something about you or our relationship? If not always, I say sometimes, occasionally, wonderfully when it happens. What would you calibrate that in your position about how much of the time?
I calibrated considering what the client says, like a precious thing that has to be that I try to understand as much as I can. And when in the examples of Isidore, I think they are examples of something that can be understood better in our client. If I come to you and I tell you I had a big dream, and I tell you with something like I'd like to say something and I don't do it, then it's obvious that I'm addressing you, something that
Not
I'm
obvious to
able.
me. It's an interpretation.
Sure, we make a lot of interpretations.
Of course we do, but if I make an interpretation, I own it.
We are not
It's
sure.
not about the client, it's about the speculation in my head.
We are not sure that is the meaning. I
Right.
don't think that Isidore said that it's in that way always. I think he said it can be. It can be.
Okay, and I am fine with that. So if somebody said to Isidore, I had a little dream, that could be about me, says Isidore. But what about me being little assumes already it's true, and now I'm asking you a qualifying question about my interpretation as if I can define over there rather than the interpretation defines my point of view or my perspective or my hypothesis. The
Because
locus is here, not there.
I assume, I don't know, now we are interpreting Isidore, but I assume that he wanted to teach something. So his being so determined was because he wanted to convey an idea.
Okay, I appreciate that. I also appreciate how you would make the distinction about what the client says and when it's particular or something special there. But that really wasn't my question. My question was, out of 100 interactions with the client, or 100 different clients, that wouldn't matter really in this sense, how many of the interactions are involved in it's because of me? It has something, not only me, but it has something to do with me, the therapist.
I think that.
Not all the time. But
Huh? You don't want?
I get that it's he or you are not saying it's all the time. That it's
No,
about.
but we are interested in those interactions where you, the therapist, are involved.
And I'm
We are
asking,
interested in that.
how much of the time do you believe that's true? That what the client says is in part because of who you are in the room with them?
And it's difficult for me to answer how much of the time. But
Okay.
what I can tell you is that I'm interested in those things. I'm
Yes.
interested in the.
I am too. I jump on them.
Mhm.
That's the fresh fish.
Mhm.
That's where we both are here at the same time. So we absolutely agree on the value and the importance of when it's about the between.
Mm.
Where we disagree is how much of the time is it about the between us? That's where we disagree.
Yes, maybe. Yes, I think it's not a matter of how much of the time, but a matter of focusing on the intentionality of the client, that is, towards the therapist, because this is the locus.
See, I don't share that assumption either,
Mm-hmm.
the intentionality assumption. Of clients who come in who are absolutely oblivious to the therapist, couldn't care less about the therapist. That's part of the work, that they don't pay much attention. But there are clients who are not that interested.
It's not the client that has to be interested, it's the therapist that has an eye on how the client says the things to the therapist.
Yeah?
So it's not a matter of the client, it's our lens.
I think we're going in circles now.
Yeah.
I mean, we've repeated ourselves a few times. I think the difference is clear.
I just want to thank you for having come here for this interview,
Yeah.
for this dialogue, because I felt your interest.
Yes, I'm very interested in this. I like that you have some strong theoretical convictions. As I say, I almost always, I'm not sure. No, the intentionality one, for example, is one that I would never assume a person's intentionality. But a lot of the theoretical things you say, I support and I agree with, and then I differ when you have them across many clients or many interactions, not all, but who knows how many, and I have them some of the time that happens. So I like this discussion.
Yeah. I've experienced you determined in something that Isidore I think didn't say so rigidly, and
But that's
I
what
also-
I've been trying to unpack about, okay, if not
Yeah.
rigidly, how much?
Yeah.
And that, it's hard, I know, because it's important when it happens,
Mhm.
but does it happen all the time? Does it
Yeah.
happen 90%, 40%? I mean,
Yeah, I'm
those
not,
are hard.
Yeah, I'm not on this kind of thought, because I don't think it happens most of the time or not. I think that the client approaches the therapist to be helped, and what you look at is how he does this,
Mhm.
and we know that the therapist is included in this.
I'm smiling now. My fantasy is that we were in a workshop, you and I,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the times I work with you as client, and one of the times you work with me as client,
Mm-hmm.
and to let those differences or similarities, because there certainly
Yeah.
are similarities, unfold.
Oh, that would be very nice.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, yes. Maybe practice solves always
Yes.
theoretical problems. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, going back to Fritz, all theory is projection, just like all interpretations are projection. Doesn't mean they may not be useful, but they are also always projections, whether they're useful or not. You don't project in a vacuum, so there's usually some piece of it that is accurate.
Mhm. Projection is a perception also.
Yeah, of course. But a theory in a book is somebody's phenomenological organization that they wrote down and called it a theory. It's a way of organizing and making meaning, which is what phenomenology is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, thank you
Thank-
so much. We
thank
have an
you.
appointment to work. We
Yeah.
have
Yes,
something to do
yes,
together.
yes. And if you don't show up, it's about me.
course.